Hello everyone, that's me again. I'm back in Tokyo, a little jet lagged, so maybe my voice is a little hoarse. However, I'd like to make a video for you on Sunday, as usual, and answer some of your questions that you left in my previous post last Sunday. Thank you so much. I was so happy to read your comments and to see that you know so much about my country. A lot more, I would say, that my students in Japan normally know. I counted about 16 different questions. Some are more specific and I need to do some research to answer them well, which I will do. So today I'd like to answer some of the basic questions that are maybe easier for me to deal with at first. So let's get started. I'm from Moscow, from the capital of Russia, which is located in the Central European part of my big country. In fact, my family, both of my parents and their families come from the south of Russia, from the place that is now called Volgograd, but in the Soviet Russia it used to be called Stalingrad. So both of them came to Moscow when they got married and had my older sister. But I was born in Moscow already. However, I visited my parents' hometown every summer when I was a kid. I would like to take a little mention of the fact that my opinions and the answers to your questions about Russia in general, of course, are based on the fact that most of the things I know about Russians come from the fact that I am a Muscovite, that I was born in Russia, that I lived 29 years before I moved to Japan in Moscow. I will be making some kind of comments about that as well. But I think this is important. Russia is such a huge country, and my opinion will probably only reflect what people living in Moscow would experience. So yeah, that's my answer to this question. This is an interesting question, thank you, because I love reading, and even though for the past 10 or 15 years I have mostly been reading in English, of course I can name my favorite Russian authors. So from the classics of the 19th century, it is Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, you might know, Idiot, Brothers Karamazov. Then from the 20th century, I only recently, a couple of years ago, I found out about the works of Davlatov. He was writing in the late 70s. He was one of the authors who emigrated to the United States in the late Soviet times. And he writes very skillfully and wittily about the struggles of Russian intelligentsia of those times. And then when I was 14, 15, 16 years old, I read everything by Boris Akunin, who wrote historical fiction, detective fiction, and about the adventures this is a great question again. Of course, we have a lot of special kinds of foods in Russia. And just now, I'm back from Russia and my parents fed me a lot. So what I can remember is we have pelmeni, which is essentially dumplings with meat fillings mostly that we boil, and you can have them as soup with broth, or separately. And we use sour cream to go with them. I love pelmeni and any kind of dumpling, in fact. Secondly, there's my favorite, absolute favorite, is the Russian summer soup, which is called okroshka. It's a little strange, even for some Russians I know. It's different kinds of boiled vegetables, such as potatoes, carrots, also fresh vegetables, such as cucumbers and radish, all mixed, sliced and mixed together in a bowl. And we have it because it's soup, so you need to add some liquid, but the liquids are varied. Most often it will be kvass, which is traditional Russian bread drink. The drink is made from fermented bread. In fact, my sister can make her own kvass, but you can buy it in any store in Russia, especially summertime. It's a favorite, everybody's favorite. You can also use some varieties of dairy products, kefir, for example, and other, but my family does not normally do that, so I'm not an expert in other varieties. So that was number 2. And what else? Of course, we have a lot of heavy dishes, like heavy soups, like shi and borscht and others. This soup with a lot of vegetables, and they are never thin. I guess in order to live in Russia in the old days, when the climate was much colder, people needed to have a lot of nutrients in their meals. That's why, for the most part, Russian diet is gonna be very heavy for your stomach, with a lot of potatoes and meat and vegetables, and a lot of pickles as well. Because for the winter time, most families in the past, and in the Soviet times as well, in fact, used to pickle and prepare their own vegetables to store at homes for the period of the winter, when getting fresh vegetables would be really difficult. Well, first of all, I'd like people to understand and know that Russia is a huge country, as you know, it's the largest country in the world, which means that Russian people and Russia itself is very different. It can be very different depending on where you go, where people that you talk to live, where they come from, what is their ethnic and cultural background. If you talk to me, I'm from Moscow, I have a very specific outlook, probably, although I try to keep it as open-minded as possible, but still, it's Moscow. And it's not always cold. In fact, this summer has been so hot. It has been unseasonably hot the whole time. For 3 or 4 months, it has been 25 to 30 degrees. So no, it's not always cold in Russia. And Russia is so big, so there are places where probably it doesn't snow so much, such as Sochi and the Black Sea coast. So Russia is not only Moscow, and Russia is very different. Also, of course, I'd like people to understand that not everybody in Russia drinks vodka. I don't, for example. It's a little difficult, I understand, because every country has its own history, which makes the country be what it is. And same, of course, is true about Vietnam. And I think Russia has had a very, very complicated history. And I would like people to kind of be open to learning more about it, to not associate Russia only with the current Putin times or only with the long 70-year period of communist Russia, Stalin times. There were years of imperial Russia and years of pre-imperial Russia, 15th, 14th, 13th century, which are very important in the for our nation. There was the Tatar yoke in the 12th century, which really shaped a lot of what Russians look like, in fact, as well, and other matters as well. I would like people to understand that Russia is a multi-ethnical, multicultural country with such a span of land. Of course, there are so many different cultures. People will not all look like me, like blonde and blue-eyed. In fact, probably most people would not look like me. So I think the diversity of Russia should be appreciated and celebrated. And finally, I would like people to know about Russian culture, fine arts and ballet and amazing literature and theater tradition.